In this blog series, What NAEP Can Do for You, we take a look at the utility of using NAEP results and resources to improve pedagogy, assessment, and outcomes in the classroom. In these first two short videos, we explore how NAEP's long-term trend results in reading and mathematics reflect important national initiatives designed to improve student outcomes in the classroom. These are the NAEP long-term trends for 9 and 13-year-olds in reading. We see the 9-year-olds at the bottom in blue and the 13-year-olds at the top in orange. The NAEP long-term trend study is conducted every 4 years and started in 1971. The last administrations were in 2022 and 2023. These trends that we see do appear to coincide with a number of national programs designed to improve student outcomes. And they also coincide with national events and issues such as the COVID pandemic, which we'll discuss here at the end of the trend line. The NAEP reading scale, shown here on the left, ranges from 0 to 500. These are average scores. So the lowest average score for each of these trend lines is 208 for the 9-year-olds and 255 for the 13-year-olds. These are the lowest scores in the entire trend line, indicating that student performance increased since the first administration of the trend study. What do these scores mean? These are empirical levels. Their description at each level is based on the items that the students took and were able to correctly answer. The scores for the 9-year-olds, the trend scores fall into this level 200, that students demonstrate partially developed skills and understanding. And some of the description that NAEP provided is summarized here. Students at this level can demonstrate the ability to understand specific sequentially related information, such as identifying facts from simple informational paragraphs, stories, and news articles, and combine ideas and make inferences on short, uncomplicated passages. The 13-year-old trends are in the level 250, and that indicates that students can interrelate ideas and make generalizations. So that's more sophisticated reading skill than the 9-year-olds can demonstrate. This is a longitudinal scale, and so it reports the older students' results on the same scale as the younger students' results. But if we want to determine, are the 13-year-olds actually performing better for their age than the 9-year-olds are performing for their age, we need to look at another NAEP study, and it's called the main NAEP study, which we will discuss in the next blog. Now let's look at some of the ways these trends reflect the possible impact of national programs designed to improve student outcomes in reading, as well as the impacts of national events that may not be so positive. While we see an initial bump in scores right after the first administration, it doesn't really last for the 9-year-olds or for the 13-year-olds, but we do start to see the trend results track up slowly in the 90s, and this can coincide with the Goals 2000 Education America Act, which was launched in 1994. Goals 2000 incentivized states to create and align assessments, standards, and accountability systems. And it included revisions to Title I. Title I is the largest federal education program for K-12 schools established under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. Its primary goal is to provide financial assistance to schools with high numbers of percentages of children from low-income families, helping ensure that students meet challenging academic standards. You will find that most of these national programs infuse money into the school systems, K-12 public schools, through the Title I fund. The first set of results that we see with a sustained increase started here in the 90s And these investments in early childhood education and in scientifically based reading perhaps improved reading results for the 9-year-olds. We don't really see the same type of improvement, however, for the 13-year-olds. We see improvement for the 13-year-olds later in the 2010s. In the early 2000s, we see a jump, particularly in the 9-year-old reading results, that can be associated with the passing the No Child Left Behind legislation, which increased school accountability. That's not always seen as a positive for educators. However, there was an infusion of funds that amounted to $45 billion in Title I funding going to schools. This Title I funding also required schools to disaggregate results by different student demographic groups, such as students who are on IEPs, students who receive free and reduced lunch. There were a number of disaggregation categories that were required. This had the impact of schools evaluating their programs on all of these student groups and making changes within the school. There was also a requirement of adequate yearly progress for schools and these subgroups of students. And the states, they needed to align their tests to stringent academic standards. This was the first time in the country where the federal government required states to have assessments that aligned to important content and process standards. The Common Core state standards were a much more rigorous set of standards that could be used across states. The Common Core state standards, however, was not a federal government project. It was led by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, or CCSSO. So the Obama administration issued a number of grant programs tied to the use of the Common Core state standards, and one of them encouraged states to join multi-state collaborative testing programs, and 2 were launched, Smarter Balanced and PARC. The Smarter Balanced assessment is still going strong, although some states have since published their own standards. The majority of state standards and most state tests continue to borrow heavily from the Common Core state standards. So while the adoption of the Common Core state standards is mixed, it does coincide with this modest increase in results from 2004 to 2012. Following these initiatives, scores tended to decline a bit, both in reading and in math. This decline is not associated with any particular initiative. There are a number of theorists that have demonstrated that students' increased use of screens has contributed to negative academic outcomes. Once students meet a 1-hour threshold, on average, their academic outcomes tend to decline precipitously. There's a study conducted by Twenge and Campbell in 2018 demonstrating the statistically significant impact of using screens more than 1 hour a day. In particular, older students tend to use more screens, the 13-year-olds. This drop in the NAEP results from 2012 to 2020 can be partially explained by the increased use of screens for students at this age level. The younger students were found to use screens at a lower rate at that time. Finally, the COVID pandemic brought in-person schooling to a halt in many parts of the U.S. The subsequent drop in scores was catastrophic, eliminating almost all score gains in the 13-year-old cohort and most of the gains in the 9-year-old cohort for that year. When the pandemic hit in the spring of 2020, most schools went to fully remote instruction. Remote instruction was the norm until the vaccine rollout in the winter of 2020 and in the spring of 2021. NAEP questionnaires ask teachers, schools, and other educational professionals their observations on what's happening in their schools and districts. The questionnaire results reported that remote instruction was the norm in the fall of 2020, as 67% of public school students were receiving fully remote instruction. This lack of face-to-face instruction wreaked havoc in public schools, and this is reflected in the NAEP trend study results, in which any gains made by the 13-year-olds were almost completely wiped out by the last data point in this trend study. With these long-term trend results, NAEP does indeed live up to its reputation as the nation's report card.